Too scary, outdated theming, structural collapse imminent? All of these Disney World rides had to change, but we're telling you exactly why here on DFV Guide. Hey everybody, it's AJ for Disney Food Vlog. Now, aside from the iconic snacks and shows, one of the best parts about Disney World is the rides. You got coasters, dark rides, family water rafts, even full-on safari tours. But despite our love for them, lots of classic rides have experienced extreme renovations or closures to keep up with the times and guest satisfaction. So in today's video, we're taking a walk through Disney World's ride history to look at what some of our favorite rides used to be like and why they had to change into what we know them as now. Guess I should address one of the most controversial ones first. Journey into Imagination with Figment. So, Journey into Imagination over at Epcot features that wonderfully kooky and ever so popular purple dragon that guests have come to know and love and be slightly annoyed by. Not going to name names here, but despite this being Figment's ride, Figment wasn't always the star. When the attraction opened in 1983, it featured that red-headed professor, the Dreamfinder, with Figment as his trusty sidekick. And that's how it stayed until 1999, when Journey into Imagination was reimagined as Journey into Your Imagination. The new theme was based on Honey, I Shrunk the Audience, a 4D show that used to be in the theater next door, where you'll find the Pixar short films playing currently. Please leave me a comment if you've actually gone to see them, because that would be exciting. Dr. Nigel Channing replaced the Dreamfinder and led guests through the Imagination Institute, but not before first taking guests through an imagination scanner and declaring them all imagination-less. Now that's pretty rude. The labs you were taken through explored sound, illusion, color, gravity, and connections, which sounds cool but really lacked the imagination and artistic celebration that the first rendition of this ride used to promote. Guests complained that the ride felt like a rush job and half finished at that. Not to mention there was barely any Figment. They'd stripped out our poor scaly friend from the ride almost completely. This disappointed outcry from guests led to Disney eventually shuttering the reimagined ride just a year later in 2000. When Journey into Imagination with Figment opened in 2002, the lovable imaginary dragon was center stage once again. Imagineers kept Channing as a character, but he and Figment now share the starring role. Though the ride seems to have improved from its second iteration because the bar hadn't been set too terribly high for it, to be honest, people who rode the OG version back in the 80s still miss it to this day. But that doesn't mean Disney's done with Figment yet. During the Destination D23 event back in November 2021, we got to see the original dream-catching machine put back on display straight out of the Walt Disney Archives. And the very next year, during the D23 convention in 2022, we learned that Figment is going to be getting his own meet and greet later in 2023. Who knows, maybe someday we'll hear about a fourth, even better iteration of Journey into Imagination with Figment on down the line someday. Now, let's talk about Kilimanjaro Safaris next. I know, you're like, AJ, Kilimanjaro Safaris is totally right there. It's in Animal Kingdom. There's nothing different. Yes, there is. Now, warning, the original version of this ride is pretty gruesome to say the least. Kilimanjaro Safaris over in Disney's Animal Kingdom is a fun, lively tour through the terrains of the park. Now, during this ride, you can spot tons of real animals like lions, flamingos, hyenas, hippos, giraffes, all while your knowledgeable safari guide tells you fun facts about each creature along the way. But it turns out Kilimanjaro Safaris originally was intended to be much, much darker. The original plans for this immersive attraction centered around a mother elephant, Big Red, and her baby, Little Red. Now, some of you might remember these two being an integral part of the show there. To really hammer home the fact that poachers are evil, not that I needed further convincing, Disney had a fake but very real-looking dead body of Mama Elephant Big Red, which was a big shock factor that you came across later on during the ride. Orphaned Little Red is nowhere to be seen, and the safari guide had to embark on a chase to catch the poachers who killed the baby's mother. As if the sudden gore of a murdered elephant wasn't enough of a scare for you, during the climax of the ride, you'd find out that the poachers captured poor Little Red in a cage. The ride ended with the poachers being caught and the baby being saved by, cast members carrying around fake gun props, which was also pretty jarring for riders. but safe to say this was a tough one to stomach. Like, how do you re-enter Animal Kingdom after that and then go about your day as if nothing happened? Sure, the ride was more thrilling back then, and it really did a good job of making the dangers of poaching loud and clear, but the brutal scene was just too aggressive and potentially traumatizing. Big Red was removed from the ride post-cast member previews, but the rest of the intense storyline stayed the same, just with Big Red's fate more up in the air. In 2007, the plot thinned out even further and made it to where we're supposed to keep an eye out for poachers, but the baby elephant supposedly spotted nearby is never in any real danger. And then in 2012, Kilimanjaro Safaris plot was stripped completely to focus more on the living, breathing, and completely safe and happy animals living inside the animal kingdom. Next up is ExtraTERRORestrial Alien Encounter. Is this a ride? We'll call it a ride for now since there's a whole lot to unpack here, but maybe more of an attraction? Tomorrowland and Magic Kingdom used to be the home of a pretty traumatizing experience. ExtraTERRORestrial Alien Encounter opened in the summer of 1995, and the children who had the privilege of experiencing it are still scarred to this very day. ExtraTERRORestrial Alien Encounter was set in a lab that wanted to show off some major interplanetary teleportation nonsense. What could possibly go wrong? Everything went wrong. The technology worked a little too well and teleported an alien creature into the show building. Okay, let's take a few steps back here a bit. To fully understand what guests experienced during this attraction, you have to know a little more about the seating arrangement. Though this was a theater that remained stationary throughout the duration of the quote-unquote ride, attraction, show, guests still had to use pull-down restraints like you would on a high-speed coaster that goes upside down. These restraints were modified so that you could fully experience the alien encounter once the lights shut off in the show building, and that's when the real trauma begins. The alien would escape and you'd be left helpless in the pitch black while the restraints would push slightly into your shoulders as if the alien was perched right above you. He would also breathe in your ear and drool on your neck. Fun stuff. Totally not terrifying. Now I'm joking, the experience was extremely scary for young children and old children and adults. Though former CEO Michael Eisner had wanted to open up an edgier ride in the Magic Kingdom to appeal more to teen audiences, ExtraTERRORestrial had created quite a negative stir with guests who wanted it out of the park ASAP. The ride show lasted until November 2004 and was later replaced by Stitch's Great Escape. This became basically the same experience as ExtraTERRORestrial, but this time Stitch messed with you and burped on you and drooled on you, or was that snot? I don't know. Instead of a creature that wasn't so blue and fluffy and cute. Unfortunately, Stitch's Great Escape was still pretty scary. The animatronic of Stitch was great, but the sensation of him jumping onto your shoulder restraints and burping Bean Burrito in your face just didn't go over too well. Toward the end of its run, Stitch's Great Escape was opened seasonally until it finally closed its doors completely in 2018. So what's happening with the Stitch's Great Escape show building now? Well, currently, not a whole lot. Before the 2020 closures, the building was used as a temporary meet and greet location for Stitch, as well as other rotating characters. Now it's used as a break room for cast members. On March 20th, 2020, Walt Disney Imagineering did file for demolition interior permits for the Stitch's Great Escape address, which could eventually lead to them completely gutting the inside of the attraction, or at least part of it. So we know Disney wants to do something with this show building, but what exactly remains a mystery. And this is the one that you may have a grudge about for a while. We're going to talk about Great Movie Ride next. One of the opening day attractions at Disney's Hollywood Studios, or Disney MGM Studios, as we knew it at the time, was the Great Movie Ride, a tour housed inside a replica of the Grauman's Chinese Theater that took guests inside the movies and mixed animatronics with live actors to pull off this impressive ride show performance, time and time again. Now, this ride stuck around for 28 years, but when Disney's partnership with Turner Classic Movies ended and the on-ride animatronics were really starting to show their age, Disney decided to pull the curtain on this one. The Great Movie Ride's last run took place on August 13th, 2017. But Disney didn't get rid of the Grauman's Chinese Theater replica. Instead, they gutted it and added a brand new ride, which we all know today as Mickey and Minnie's Runaway Railway. This is one of the more polarizing changes to a classic attraction. While guests have raved about the technology and entertainment value of Runaway Railway since its grand opening on March 4th, 2020, lots of people also continue to mourn the Great Movie Ride and its stellar tribute to some of Hollywood's best films of all time. It's like your childhood dying. Me, I'm sandwiched right there in the middle. Though Runaway Railway is a ton of fun and the 2.5D technology is super impressive, I grew up with Hollywood Studios, or MGM, and I still miss the days when our ride vehicle used to be taken over by the gangsters and outlaws as our heroic tour guide had to brave a temple curse in order to reclaim the vehicle. Yeah, you had to be there. Now, here's one of the most recent attraction changes for you. It's not a recent attraction, just a recent attraction change. It's no secret that Carousel of Progress in Magic Kingdom, as much as we love it, has definitely started to feel its age in that final scene of the show. If you haven't ridden Carousel of Progress before, it's more of a show than it is a ride. It's a slowly rotating theater that takes you through 4 different scenes that give you a little snippet of a family taking on life and holidays through the 20th century. But the last scene of the show is supposed to be set in the not-so-distant future. And since this ride opened back in Magic Kingdom in 1975, the future is ironically not all that futuristic now that we're in 2023. Instead of Disney completely doing an overhaul of this scene, they touched it up a bit in the fashion department. Now the animatronics outfits and hairstyles have been updated to give them a more modern look. Nothing else in this scene has really changed though. You've got the same narration and same technological marvels that really aren't all that marvelous anymore. But regardless, it's still nice to see the family at least keeping up with the fashion somewhat. Now let's stay in the Magic Kingdom for a while because this park has years and years and years of changes under its belt that we can scour through. In 2021, some of these changes hit the world-famous Jungle Cruise. Jungle Cruise has always been a lighthearted ride, except back when we got to watch lions gobble up a zebra. Seriously, what is with Disney and their violent animal scenes? But a couple years back, Disney decided to switch up the Jungle Cruise storyline a little bit. It wasn't the gobbled up zebra that pushed Disney into making these changes. You see, in previous iterations of this ride, some cultures weren't placed in the best light. Disney wanted to ensure that guests from around the world could feel welcome in the Disney parks, and that the stories told through the attractions continued to be respectful of the diverse world we live in, quote unquote. Throughout the attraction, a few scenes were added or redone to create a more cohesive, inclusive storyline. Part of that included introducing new characters to the ride. Each of these new characters, which included birdwatcher, an entomologist, a wildlife painter, a photographer, and the all-too-important skipper, have their own story and cultural heritage, though you won't learn too terribly much about them unless you do a little extra digging yourself, since you're only going to see them quickly in passing during a small portion of the cruise. Turns out they've been stranded and have found themselves in a rather pointy situation. But why are they stranded? What happened to their boat? Float down the river a little further, you get your answer. It's been overrun by chimpanzees. Before all these extra changes were made, there were other changes that happened even sooner, and that included the removal of Trader Sam. The original scene was removed from Magic Kingdom Jungle Cruise in early April 2021 due to its more negative depictions of quote-unquote natives. Imagineer Susanna Tubert explained that this reimagining was less focused on solving the negative depictions of certain people and more centered around creating new, positive cultural representations. Now the Trader Sam location has returned, but with a new twist. Once again, we've got animals causing mischief raiding the store while Trader Sam is away. And Pirates of the Caribbean in Magic Kingdom has undergone a number of tweaks and changes throughout the years, but there have been 2 major additions to this classic attraction that demanded guests' attention when they were included. The first was the addition of Captain Jack Sparrow. Captain Jack was a character created strictly for the 2003 Pirates of the Caribbean film, but following the popularity of the movie, Captain Jack was added to several of the ride scenes in 2006. The second change happened more recently, in 2018. Originally, Pirates of the Caribbean included a rather controversial take a wench for a bride scene. During this scene, women were auctioned off to pirates, some of which would chant the phrase, "We wants the redhead." Because this whole concept didn't seem very family-friendly, and Disney received several complaints from guests, the scene was swapped out. Now, this redhead is no longer a villager on display. Instead, she's a plundering pirate named Red who's helping to oversee the auction of the village's goods to increase their rum supply. And you know what? Good for her. Even before Red the Pirate made her big debut, Disney was conflicted about the way male pirates were chasing after the females in the next scene over, so they changed this scene as well. Now the women go around chasing the men with brooms held over their heads for a more lighthearted and comedic approach instead of what was previously being insinuated. Now, most of the time when Disney needs to change a ride, the turnaround is pretty fast. But when it came to the Walt Disney World Railroad in Magic Kingdom, it took 4 years for that locomotive to return to us. 4 years! But that's not really the train's fault. It's actually Tron's fault, kinda. Tron, Light Cycle Run, was stepping on the railroad's toes, or tracks, with its Tomorrowland location, so Imagineers needed to redo the track in order to fix this slight hiccup. Imagineers also added a Tron tunnel for the train to go under, giving you an up-close look at the coaster from a whole different angle. But once again, why did such a change take 4 years to get her done? Originally, Tron was slated to open in time for Walt Disney World's 50th anniversary on October 1st, 2021. But those pandemic closures brought everything to a screeching halt. During the train's longer-than-intended closure, it was able to receive a few more enhancements, though. Along with a new track and tunnel, the number one engine on the train was completely refurbished, and an all-new narration was added to guide guests from one land to the next. The narration now features a small portion that talks about new critters moving in to make a splash over where Splash Mountain used to be. Oh yeah, you can bet we're going to be talking about this change later on, because it's a big one. The narration also advises guests to take a listen because we're almost there, a reference taken directly from Tiana's big musical number that she belts out during her movie, Princess and the Frog. So even though this refurb took way longer than Disney originally expected, the train returned to us at the end of last year looking better than ever. Oh, good. It's time to talk about another sad elephant. How great. Okay, so Dumbo isn't all that sad in the Fantasyland ride, and he never has been. And if you never watched the movie, then you can just assume Dumbo's a happy dude all the time. So the big changes here didn't really happen to the ride itself. It was the queue that took on the major metamorphosis. During the big Fantasyland expansion of 2012 called New Fantasyland, which added more new rides, shops, places to eat in this area of the park, Dumbo also received a shiny new addition, his very own interactive indoor queue. This area lets kids run free on all the slides and rope courses so that they can pass the time waiting to ride Dumbo instead of having to stand impatiently in the direct heat of an actual physical line, which was how it was set up before. When you go inside this tent, a cast member will hand you a pager. Once it's your group's turn to ride, the pager will go off and you'll make your way to the front, kind of like waiting for your table at a restaurant. It really was a much needed addition to the ride that guests didn't realize they needed so badly until it was built. Disney also added a second Dumbo aerial carousel to soak up all the demand, meaning wait times aren't just more entertaining, they're also much shorter too. Alright, so while every other retheme in Disney seems to be based around taking things down a few notches to keep them from traumatizing children, Haunted Mansion is the only ride that seems to be able to get away with doing the opposite. Haunted Mansion is another ride that has undergone a number of tweaks and changes throughout the years, but a 2006 refurbishment in Disney World brought the biggest changes to the storyline yet. The 2006 refurb introduced Constance Hatchaway, the ghostly bride in the attic. We meet Constance as we pass by portraits of her and her former husbands, each of which has meant an untimely and rather violent demise at the hands of the blushing bride. Now, as the story goes, Constance obtained her wealth by marrying rich men and then murdering them following their wedding day. That's why each time we see her in the attic following another marriage, she's wearing an additional strand of pearls around her neck. Now, if you remember a ghostly bride before 2006, you're not losing it. There was an attic bride before Constance, but she was nameless and played a much smaller role. And that's not the only change the 2006 refurbishment brought to the Magic Kingdom attraction. The endless staircase scene at the beginning of the ride was also a new addition. Prior to the refurb, this was just a dark room filled with spiders and cobwebs. But the changes haven't stopped with Constance and the staircase. During the 2022 D23 convention, we learned that this year, the iconic Hatbox Ghost, who has gathered quite the cult following over in Disneyland, is now going to be added to Magic Kingdom's Haunted Mansion as well. Now, a headless ghost, a bride that hacks off heads for a living. You don't think there's any parallel between the two, do you? Surely not. Alright, it's time to head into Disney's Animal Kingdom for this next ride change, which actually may be more drastic than you think. When DINOSAUR first opened in Dinoland USA back in 1998, it was actually called Countdown to Extinction. Raise your hand in the comments if you remember that. Countdown to Extinction had essentially the same plot that Dinosaur has now. You're gonna need to go back in time to go get that dino being an iguanodon, needed for science, I guess. But when Dinosaur the movie came out in 2000, Disney went ahead and changed the name of the ride from Countdown to Extinction to Dinosaur, as a seamless tie-in for the then current Disney film. See y'all, IP is not a new thing in Disney parks. The film's protagonist, Aladar the Iguanodon, was added to the outside portion of the ride, but he also made appearances in both the pre-show and on-ride footage. But one of the trickiest changes that happened during this switch was the ride's intensity. Now, if you've ridden Dinosaur recently, you already know that it feels like a pretty intense attraction as is. But the movements of the Time Rovers now aren't nearly as intense as they used to be. These Time Rovers were actually toned down so that the height requirement could be lowered from 46 inches to 40 inches. This allowed younger fans of the movie to experience the ride too. And since the younger fans were riding, Disney wanted to make sure they weren't getting too traumatized in the process, so many of the sounds, like the roars and footsteps of the dinos, were pulled back to not seem as close and threatening to guests. But I'm gonna be honest, it terrifies me every time, so I can't even imagine what it was like before. Alright, sometimes the reason major ride changes have to happen isn't because a ride is too intense or the theming's too extreme. Sometimes it happens because of a sponsorship change. I know, so boring, right? But that's exactly what happened to Epcot's Test Track. When Test Track opened back in 1999, this high-speed attraction was sponsored by General Motors Engineering. The ride originally took on more of a crash dummy vibe. Guests entered into GM's testing lab, where they became part of a series of simulated safety tests to make sure the newest cars were up to code for future drivers. This included being part of a series of tests like the hill climb test, the suspension test, the brakes test, the environmental chamber test, the ride handling test, the barrier test, and everyone's favorite, the high speed test. But when General Motors and Disney parted ways, Chevrolet took over Test Track sponsorship, and that led to a whole ride revamp by 2012. Now you start your adventure in the queue over at the Chevrolet Design Center, where you get to virtually design your own car that you'll be racing against other guests. Afterwards, you'll board a special sim car where you'll see how your design holds up in, again, a series of tests, meaning more sudden brakes and more high speeds coming your way. Instead of this ride taking place in a warehouse-like facility, the track now wraps through a series of chambers that are way more futuristic looking, with dark sets illuminated with neon lights that all look very Tron-like to me. And we're back with another Disney ride that was completely rethemed despite the outcry of superfans. Maelstrom opened in Epcot's Norway Pavilion back in 1988 and took guests on a boat ride in a Viking-themed ship past scenes of Norwegian villages. And of course there were seafarers and some animatronic trolls that wanted to put curses on you, but we always forgave them for some reason. Though the ride was met with a general thumbs up from guests, Disney started to notice that over time the Norway Pavilion didn't have the same draw that it used to when Maelstrom had first opened. But then Frozen was released to theaters in 2013, and a big ol' light bulb went off for the Imagineers. Frozen was like a plague that spread through Disney World. I hate to describe it that way because I do like Frozen, but that's the best visual I've got for you because its popularity was contagious. We saw meet and greets pop up, prompting some of the longest meet and greet lines Disney had ever seen for characters. We saw Frozen merch everywhere. We saw Frozen Summer Fun Days take over Disney's Hollywood Studios, which had a full-fledged ice skating rink inside the park in the summer. Times were very frozen indeed. Every single new snack had blue frosting. It was wild. And that's when Imagineers knew what needed to be done next. After all, what better way to reignite a passion for the Norway Pavilion than by adding Frozen, which they knew would be an instant hit. And considering the movie was deeply inspired by Scandinavian culture in the first place, it made sense. But in order for this ride to happen within the tiny Norway area, Maelstrom had to be sacrificed, and gave its final ride in 2014 to make way for Frozen Ever After. For those who enjoyed the history and the story that Maelstrom once provided, there were a lot of complaints toward the fact that Disney was getting too overzealous with their IP characters, fixing rides that weren't broken and essentially stripping the World Showcase from its authentic cultural influences. But Disney continued to see the addition of Frozen as a positive thing for the pavilion, and Frozen Ever After has continued to be one of the most popular rides in Epcot ever since. Frozen Ever After still uses the same ride system and track, including the memorable sequence where the boat travels backward, but this time it's because of Elsa's ice powers and not because you're being cursed by a tree troll. Epcot still pays tribute to the old Maelstrom ride through several Easter eggs that you can find throughout Frozen Ever After. First off, take a look at your ride vehicle. Since Frozen is set in Norway, Imagineers opted to use the same boats from the old ride as an homage to the history of the attraction and the Norwegian culture. The other relic? Look for the puffins towards the end of the ride. These little guys used to be featured alongside trolls and polar bears on the Maelstrom ride, and you'll see them to your right just after the big drop. If you find yourself in the queue to meet Anna and Elsa at the Royal Summer House after, be sure to keep an eye on the tapestries on the wall. They feature a few memorable trolls you used to encounter on the attraction. And we're headed over to Hollywood Studios because long, long ago in a galaxy far, far away, there was a little droid pilot named RX-24. In the original version of Star Tours in Hollywood Studios, your ship was piloted by RX-24, a droid who meant well but had a knack for getting into trouble. The plot of the ride was pretty linear back in the day, but when Disney revamped this ride in 2011, not only did it create a more randomized experience where you had the chance to fly to different lands and meet different characters each time you rode, but RX-24 was also replaced with a more familiar face to the movie franchise, C-3PO. Poor RX-24, alone and out of a job. But hold the phone, folks. His story does not end here. In the updated version of the ride, RX-24 is chilling in the maintenance section as a malfunctioning droid. No, wait, I promise the story gets better. When you make a reservation for Oga's Cantina in Galaxy's Edge, you'll see RX-24 working at his new job as a droid DJ. Yes, DJ Rex, pump up the beats. Since the first revamp of Star Tours, Disney has added even more characters and scenes for even more ride variation potential, including characters like BB-8, Finn, Kylo Ren, and area encounters straight from the planet of Batuu, aka Galaxy's Edge. Now, sometimes Disney doesn't choose to change up a ride, sometimes they're forced to. When Expedition Everest first opened in Animal Kingdom, you used to be able to encounter the Yeti, one of the largest and most complex animatronics Disney's ever added to one of their rides. And you can still encounter the Yeti, but not like you used to. The Yeti was created with two modes, A mode and B mode. A mode is when the Yeti is fully functioning. His animatronic arm will swing over you as you barely escape his clutches. It's intense, but very cool. And B mode was supposed to be a backup just in case A mode was acting up. This is when the Yeti would freeze, and instead Disney would use flashing lights to simulate movement, even though he's definitely not budging from his spot on the rock. But unfortunately, B mode is what we're all familiar with nowadays, because A mode had to be switched off years ago, shortly after the ride's opening. So will the Yeti ever go back to A mode instead of this strobe light disco mode, as many fans have come to call it? Hard to say, but it's unlikely, at least anytime soon. The Yeti's frame was built into the main structure of the mountain, so when the frame started cracking due to the animatronic's motions, the Imagineers knew this wouldn't be an easy or quick fix. To save the structural integrity of the ride, Disney had no choice but to stop the Yeti's motion until further notice. Back in 2013, during the D23 Expo, lead Imagineer Joe Rohde, who helped create not just Expedition Everest but Animal Kingdom as a whole, said this about the Yeti. You have to understand, it's a giant, complicated machine sitting on top of like a 46-foot tall tower in the middle of a finished building, so it's really hard to fix. But we're working on it, and we continue to work on it. We have tried several things. None of them quite get to the key turning of the 40-foot tower inside of a finished building, but we are working on it. I personally kind of bulldog this one in a way that doesn't always make me popular, but I will fix the Yeti someday, I swear. The promise eventually fell flat when Joe Rohde retired in 2021, but many guests now fear that Project Fix the Yeti will never see the light of day. Just because Rohde's not on the scene anymore doesn't mean Imagineers aren't still capable of bringing this Yeti back to his former glory. It's just tough to remove one of the few rides in this park for an extremely lengthy amount of time when it works perfectly fine otherwise. But we'll keep you updated on when or if we hear about any future Yeti changes. Until then, bring on the disco parties. And Spaceship Earth continues to be the prettiest girl in school, but even shiny giant golf balls have to switch things up when necessary. Now, Spaceship Earth has undergone lots of changes since its original opening back in 1982, and also several narrators as well. The original narrator was American actor Lawrence Dobkin, who appeared in several TV shows back in the 60s and 70s. In 1986, he was replaced by Walter Cronkite, that former superstar broadcaster for the CBS Evening News. Spaceship Earth had more of a refurb in 1994. After AT&T renewed their sponsorship with the ride, the ending of this attraction changed to include a brand new song called Tomorrow's Child, as well as add more audio animatronics and dioramas to what was once a pretty dark, backwards tunnel for an extended period of time. The narrator also changed again, and this time featured the voice of Jeremy Irons, whom you may know better as the voice of Scar from The Lion King. In 1999, as part of the Walt Disney World Millennium Celebration, a 25-story representation of Mickey Mouse's arm wielding a magic wand and spelling out the number 2000 was slapped onto the outer portion of this sphere. And that's where it remained until 2007, when Siemens took over the role of Spaceship Earth's sponsorship after AT&T's finally ended. The last changes that were made to this ride happened in 2008. We got Judi Dench as a narrator, whom you can hear on the ride today. as well as some new scenes like the invention of the first home computer and the new interactive ending that replaced the dioramas in the backward tunnel. This interactive ending lets guests choose their own future through a series of quick questions. The tech is fairly outdated now, which you can tell from the pictures they use of you during this activity, but it's still a fun time regardless. Now, this won't be the end of Spaceship Earth's changes. Back in 2019, we learned that Spaceship Earth would close for a lengthy renovation that would ultimately result in brand new scenes, updated technology, and a new storyline. And yes, 2019 does feel like 50 years ago, right? But like many Disney World projects that were in the works in 2020, the Spaceship Earth renovation was delayed and shelved in large part due to the closures from the COVID-19 pandemic. For a long while after the parks reopened, we weren't sure what the fate of Spaceship Earth was going to be. I remember being super excited when it actually reopened with the park. But finally, Disney revealed that the Spaceship Earth updates and the plans for a Mary Poppins dark attraction in the UK pavilion would be postponed until further notice. And that notice has yet to come. That doesn't mean those refurbs will never be put back on the table, but as Epcot is busy focusing on other things, like its Journey of Water walkthrough attraction and the Communicore Hall and Plaza, just assume that these plans will remain on the back burner, again, until further notice. But we'll make sure to let you know if the status of those projects changes. Because I don't know about you, but I have to ride Spaceship Earth like 25 more times before it ever gets another refurb. Now, we all know the Soarin' Around the World attraction in Epcot, right? Well, that Soarin' attraction wasn't always such a world traveler. This ride originally opened as Soarin' over California in Disney California Adventure in 2001. In 2005, Soarin' took its first flight in Epcot. The original version of the ride took guests on a trip above scenes throughout the state of California, including places like Yosemite National Park, Napa Valley, Lake Tahoe, and Palm Springs. But when Shanghai Disneyland opened their version of Soarin' in 2016, Soarin' Over the Horizon, it took guests to way more places like the Great Wall of China and Sydney Harbor and the Alps in Switzerland, etc., etc. So around that same time, California and Florida updated their Soarin' versions too. It's just a movie after all. Reviews were mixed on the update, though the footage is nice. It can look rather distorted in parts if you're not sitting smack dab in the middle of the seats. And if you've just tried to accomplish the Drinking Around the World challenge, it can look really distorted. The original California-based ride featured mostly shots of nature, making the warping less noticeable. And the other big changes, aside from the visuals, were an updated but similar score and new smells. The OG Soarin' featured smells like a beach, pine, and the incredible smell of the orange groves. And the new version took out the oranges, a travesty, and updated smells to fit the new scenes, like grass and jasmine and a sea breeze. While the attraction in Epcot has remained the same since the initial change, the original Soarin' Over California version likes to rear its head again for a limited run during DCA's Food and Wine Festival, just for old time's sake, and it's a blast to see it again. Staying at Epcot here, and this probably isn't the ride change you were hoping to hear about for Mission Space, but it's a change regardless. Just in case you're unfamiliar with how Mission Space is set up, you got two different ride-throughs to choose from. The Orange Mission is the more intense version that spins fast enough to create G-forces that are meant to feel like an actual rocket launch, while the Green Mission just rocks you back and forth for a less intense trip among the stars. Before 2017, both the Orange and Green missions used the same plotline. You're being sent on a mission to Mars, and an intense one at that. But in August 2017, Mission Space offered a brand new ride for those who chose the green side, one that was less high stakes and more family friendly. Now you just kind of fly around the Earth and point out familiar areas across the globe. Not much to it. As far as the Orange mission goes, the storyline is very much the same. However, the videos were updated in HD to create a much clearer experience. On top of all that, the host for this ride has changed as well. Instead of Gary Sinise walking you through the pre-show and joining you on your adventure, you now have Gina Torres, who you may know from her work on shows like Suits, Firefly, and Xena Warrior Princess. But no matter who the narrator is or how high-def the videos become, this ride will never fail to make me sick to my stomach. And time to talk about another major Fantasyland queue update and flight ride that made waiting in line way less of a drag. Peter Pan's flight has really stood the test of time for being one of the most popular dark rides in Magic Kingdom on both coasts. But before 2015, waiting in line for this one was miserable. You know how those wait times can get up to 60 plus minutes? Yeah, just imagine waiting that amount of time directly under the Orlando sun and just being outside in the heat and just sweating and Not only did the expansion of Peter Pan's queue help the line from getting out into the Fantasyland area and further bottlenecking the path, but it also kept guests nice, shaded, and in the AC. Not to mention it also added to the overall theming in a very cool way. The front hallways are lined with Neverland art, and the end hallway sprinkles you with pixie dust, whatever it's working. But the coolest part about this queue is the nursery section. Here you're going to be able to see Tinkerbell flitter about, moving furniture and messing with numerous items in the room. And you'll also be able to play with the shadows on the wall as you ring bells and catch butterflies and strike poses. I've said it before, I'll say it again, an interactive queue is the best kind of queue. And now we've come to the talk of the Magic Kingdom, y'all, the big ol' Splash Mountain change that's currently in the works. Now, I won't get too deep into the details of this one because we literally released an entire video about it not too terribly long ago that you should really check out when you get the chance. But in short, Disney decided it was time for Splash Mountain to receive a complete overhaul to reflect a more relevant and inclusive storyline. Disney shared that this new ride concept is one that all guests can connect with and be inspired by, and it speaks to the diversity of the millions of people who visit Disney parks each year. Which is why Disney is currently working on, drumroll please, Tiana's Bayou Adventure. The story of the attraction will now be based around the Disney animated film Princess and the Frog, picking up during New Orleans carnival season. Tiana's going to be busy hosting a Mardi Gras party for the people of New Orleans when she suddenly realizes that she's missing a key ingredient and needs your help to find it. Though the log flume itself will stay the same, the re-theme will bring with it new characters, fun songs, and plenty of state-of-the-art special effects. For all the Splash Mountain and Princess and the Frog fans out there, we've got some new shirts on our DFB store website too, just for you. These designs come in different styles, sizes, and colors, so you can customize them just how you want them. Plus, they'll make everyone else in the Magic Kingdom super jelly. You can pick them up over at dfbstore.com. So the moral of today's video, even the most iconic rides and attractions aren't exempt from major changes. Whether it's an updated storyline or a complete overhaul or the whims of a new sponsor, Disney is not afraid to shake things up. But something that you're always going to be able to rely on is us here at DFB uncovering the truth, giving you the best recommendations, and sticking by your side to make sure you continue to feel confident about your upcoming Disney vacation. Thanks for listening, everyone, and thanks for watching. As always, this is AJ for Disney Food Blog, and we'll see you real soon.